Hello, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland Library, and on today's edition of the Variety Pack, I'll be reading Not Nothing by Gail Forman. Gail Forman is known for a lot of her very popular young adult novels. This is more of a middle grade reader, and I really enjoy it. This is a book with two stories in it. One story is just about ready to end, and in the second story, the main character is at a crossroads. How does that main character want the story to end? So they have a decision to make. Let's get started. The first chapter is called Let Me Tell You a Story. Actually, it's two stories. One you will recognize and one you won't. One is about me and you. The other is about the boy. But it's also about me and about you. I know, I'm not making sense. I'm 107 years old. It goes with the territory. Forgive me my meanderings. Before I start, I want to make it clear. He did something bad, truly bad. I don't want you to think I'm sidestepping that, or excusing it, or even forgiving it. It's not for me to forgive anyhow. But I'm telling you the story so you understand how he got where he did, and how I got where I did, and how both of us learned to rise to the occasion of our lives. Did that get your attention, Olka? I thought it might. All right, I thought now that might have you asking all kinds of questions. Who is this narrator? Who's telling the story? Who's Olka? So I thought I'd read the book jacket, kind of put things in perspective. Alex is 12, and he did something very, very bad. A judge sentences him to spend his summer volunteering at a retirement home, where he's bossed around by an annoying and self-important do-gooder named Maya-Jade. He hasn't seen his mom in a year. His aunt and uncle don't want him, and Shady Glen's geriatric residents seem like zombies to him. Josey is 107 and is ready for his life to be over. He has evaded death many times, having survived ghettos, dragnets, and concentration camps, all thanks to the heroism of a woman named Olka and his own ability to sew. But now he spends his days in room 206 at Shady Glen, refusing to speak and waiting and waiting and waiting to die. The second chapter is called Opportunity. If there was one word in the English language the boy hated most, it was opportunity. Opportunity was the word his aunt had used when he came to live with her, as in, finally you'll have an opportunity for a real home. Maybe he and his mom had never lived in a condo with wall-to-wall carpeting or a TV the size of a small automobile attached to the wall. But any of those places had felt more like a real home than this. Opportunity was the word the judge used when he'd wagged his hairy finger at the boy, scolding him for wasting so many opportunities in his young life, warning him he was dangerously close to running out of them. And now, opportunity was the word the social worker was using when he informed the boy that he had arranged for him to spend the summer volunteering at Shady Glen Retirement Home. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. You'll start Monday morning, the social worker told the boy over the phone. I'll pick you up and take you there and back the first day, but after that, your aunt and uncle will have to arrange your transportation. What am I gonna do there? The boy asked. Whatever they ask you to, the social worker replied. Do I get paid? Not in money, the social worker replied. And even though he was on the phone, the boy could tell he was smiling. The social worker was often smiling. It was one of the many things that the boy disliked about him. After he hung up, he sat back down at the table with his aunt and uncle to eat the same bland chicken breast they had every night on account of his uncle's cholesterol and high blood pressure. The boy told his aunt and uncle what the social worker had said. I have to work at an old people's home for no money. His aunt was always complaining about how much things cost, about how much he cost, so he thought she would object on his behalf. She did not. Instead, she told him, "You made your bed, now you gotta lie in it." This was rich. He didn't have a bed in this opportunity for a real home. He slept on a lumpy couch, which he had to make and unmake every day. "And I'm not going to be your chauffeur," his aunt added. "You can take the bus. It's free for kids. A lucky thing because this whole trouble is costing me a fortune." She shook her head in the direction of his uncle, who merely grunted. But that grunt said it all. The boy wasn't even worth words. The first thing the boy said when he entered Shady Glen retirement home was, "This place smells like death." He made the pronouncement in a loud voice to clearly communicate that he did not want to be here, did not want to have another stupid opportunity shoved down his throat. He said it loud enough to drown out the pounding of his heart, which had only grown worse on the short walk from the parking lot to the circular driveway, where a handful of Shady Glen residents were sitting in front of the flower planters, some in wheelchairs, some on walkers, through the automatic glass doors and into the lobby, where he immediately smelled something unpleasant. "Oh, really?" the social worker mused, stroking his beard as he approached the large wooden reception desk. "And tell me, what does death smell like?" "It just smells so gross," the boy told the social worker. "These people all seem half dead, like zombies." Zombies, for the record, are the dead come back to life. The Shady Glade residents were the living, waiting to die. Places like Shady Glen are antechambers of death, the last stop where you wait for the last stop. Huh, you can understand why they didn't put that in the brochure. "You seem upset," the social worker said to the boy. "I don't want to be here," the boy said, giving the heavy front desk a good kick, which did not hurt the desk, but did bruise his toe. "I understand that," the social worker replied, "but here you are, and here you must be." "You sound like Yoda." "Oh, I'll take that as a compliment," the social worker replied, smiling again. "My point is, being here for the summer is out of your control, but what you do while you're here is in your control. You can either see this as a punishment or as an opportunity." Oh, there was that word again. The boy might have been only 12, but he knew already that opportunity equals balderdash. And balderdash was a much better word. Balderdash was one of his mother's favorite words. It means nonsense, ridiculousness. Let me introduce you to Etta. She's a longtime nurse and was recently promoted to director of Shady Glen. "She's a good friend of mine," the social worker said, and led him to a door. He knocked and opened it without waiting for a response. In a small office behind a desk piled with folders sat Etta. Even in her chair, the boy could tell she was very tall, very pregnant, and had very dark skin. She started to get up, but the social worker gestured for her to stay put. They spent some time talking about her pregnancy, which was both boring and gross, before Etta leveled a no-nonsense gaze at the boy. "Welcome to Shady Glen," she told him. "I am Mrs. Winston." She turned to the social worker. "Frank, I can take it from here." The social worker handed her a folder with the boy's name on it in large block letters. He didn't like that. People he didn't know having folders with his name on them. Reading things about him that were none of their business. Thinking they were better than him. Though the social worker had sworn up and down that no one would know the reason he was here, the man was also the kind of person who called being forced to work for no money in a building full of zombies who smelled like death and opportunity. In other words, a person full of balderdash. After the social worker left, Mrs. Winston sucked her teeth and narrowed her eyes at him. "I'm letting you work here as a personal favor to my friend, and because I believe in second chances. But I do not believe in third chances, and I'm 32 weeks pregnant, so do not make my job harder, because you will be out of here before you can say, Mrs. Winston does not play. At that moment, one of the residents knocks on the door and asks for help. As she's leaving, Etta turns around and says to the boy, "So, you and I have an understanding?" She pointed 2 fingers toward her eyes and back at the boy in an "I'm watching you" gesture. The boy says, "I guess so." "Good." And then the last thing she says is, "And you go and find Ms. Sandler." "Who's Mrs. Sandler?" But Etta's already gone. And so begins one of the most frustrating, one of the creepiest scavenger hunts the boy has ever been on. He wanders down the hall of the retirement home looking for Mrs. Sandler. Nobody knows that Mrs. Sandler has ever heard of her. And he ends up going into a supply closet in a room full of adult diapers, which kind of creeps him out. But finally, in the end, Mrs. Sandler found him. He was in the courtyard, a square of grass surrounded by tables and chairs and a few barbecue grills and even a waterfall, which was pretty nice. Someone tapped his shoulder, and still on guard against zombies and killer dolls, he yelped. "Sorry," the shoulder tapper replied. "I didn't mean to scare you." "Oh, like you'd scare me," he fired back, because this was just a girl around his age, wearing a plaid skirt, sparkly tights, and a t-shirt with a logo from the Phonax Force movies. "Good. So, I hear you're looking for me?" she said, tapping a clipboard with a blue Bic pen. "No, I'm looking for Mrs. Sandler." "There is no Mrs. Sandler here, but I guess I'm Ms. Sandler. Maya-Jade Spears Sandler. Double hyphenated. A mouthful, I know. That's why I sometimes just use Sandler. Anyhow, Ms. Sandler, that's me." She tapped herself on the chest. Her elbow was covered with a large bandage. So many things confused the boy, starting with all the words she was saying, and her railroad train of a name, and her suggestion that she was in charge of him. "Maya Sandler?" he asked. "Maya-Jade Spears Sandler," she said. "But you can call me Maya-Jade." "Maya-Jade," he repeated. "No, Maya-Jade, with a hyphen." "Isn't that what I just said?" "You didn't use a hyphen. I can tell the difference if you're not using the hyphen." Once upon a time, when he had been a good student at school, he'd been an expert at grammar, understanding when to use that or which or who or whom. So he knew that you couldn't hear a hyphen. "Do you work here?" he asked. "Do I look like I work here?" "Kind of." She was clearly a kid, but she held that clipboard with such authority. "Duh, I'm 12. My grandmother lives here. I'm just visiting." "Oh, is your grandmother—" He struggled to remember the name of the lady who tried to give him her doll. "Ginny?" Maya-Jade sighed heavily and rolled her eyes. "Ginny Kung is Korean. I'm Chinese. Big difference. And before you get confused and start asking me if all the Asians at Shady Glen are related to me, my grandmother is Vivian, and she's white. I'm adopted. No, I don't know anything about my birth parents, and no, I don't know how to make chow mein or do karate. No, I don't speak Chinese, which is not a language, but a bunch of different languages, like over 300. And I see just as well as anyone else. Any other dumb questions we need to get out of the way?" A not dumb question popped into the boy's head. "Are you competing for bossiest person of the year?" But he kept his mouth shut. "Anyhow," Maya-Jade continued, "why are you looking for me?" "Mrs. Winston told me to find you." "Oh, do you have a grandparent here?" "No," he said gruffly, because he did not have grandparents here or anywhere, at least none that he'd met. "I'm volunteering." He said volunteering in the same tone he might have said diarrhea-ing, but Maya-Jade didn't seem to notice. "Cool, me too. I mean, my Nana lives here, but I'm volunteering for the summer. I'm kind of the activities coordinator." "You're volunteering here?" On purpose? He said this in a tone that he might have used to say, "You're diarrheaing in your pants? On purpose?" "Well, yeah," she said. And maybe this time she heard the diarrhea, because in a less bossy voice, she added, "It's almost time for bingo. If you want, I can show you how to call it." She tapped the clipboard again with her pen. It was like a little drumbeat to remind people that she was in charge. And there was no way she was in charge of him. "I don't need your help." "Oh, you'd be surprised. Bingo gets a little heated. Not as bad as trivia, but almost." "Do you think I'm some kind of moron?" he added, jaw clenching. "Well, with the way you're acting now, yeah, maybe a little," Maya-Jade said. Her voice was kind of jokey, but that made it worse. All morning he'd felt like a pot on the stove, the water getting warmer and warmer. But when she said that, the pot boiled over, hot starchy anger flowing out of him. "Well, you're definitely a moron," he said. His tone was not jokey at all. Maya-Jade's eyes widened in surprise and hurt. It felt good to see it. Who was the moron now? "Well, if I am, I'm the moron in charge of you." She hugs the clipboard to her chest like it was a shield. "So you have to do what I say." "No, I don't. You're just some stupid loser who has nothing better to do than hang out in this dump all summer." At this, Maya-Jade's lip quivered. "If you think it's so bad here, then why don't you just leave?" Leave. It was all he'd wanted to do all morning. And though he just told her he didn't have to listen to her, Mrs. Winston had said that he did. So, without another word, he did just that. He stalked out of the courtyard, past the receptionist, through the double doors, and showed opportunity and that bossy Maya-Jade just who was in charge here. That night during supper, the boy gets a phone call. It's the social worker. He heard what happened that day, and he tells the boy that he's got to go back. Otherwise, he might find himself at a place a whole lot worse than Shady Glen. So the next morning, he goes back. He's not too happy about it, but neither is Maya-Jade. She got in trouble for telling him to leave. So she gives him all kinds of miserable, awful, dirty jobs to do that nobody else wants to, as a kind of a punishment for the way he talked to her. The first few weeks there are very miserable. The residents don't like him. He doesn't like the residents. One of them even called him a criminal. So he's pretty miserable until he meets Joseph. Josey has been watching Alex and notices that Alex is really an interesting boy and a very intelligent boy. But they don't speak to each other until a week later, when all of the residents come down with the flu. And they're all quarantined to their rooms, and Alex is chosen to deliver the meals to the rooms. And that's when he delivers a meal to Joseph, and they begin their conversations. The next room was 206. Joseph Kravitz, it said. No dietary restrictions. That was me. I didn't answer, of course. I never did. Because, as I mentioned, up until a few days before, I hadn't spoken in years. He found me propped up in my bed, donning a sweater that Etta had dropped off. I still did that, even at my age, mended things for people at Shady Glen. I wasn't sure how it happened. I must have been sewing something of my own in the common area one day. I sewed like other people knitted to occupy my mind, to calm my nerves. I never felt safer than I did with a needle in my hand. The next thing I knew, things started showing up. Dresses with hems that had come half undone, or trousers that needed to be taken in or let out because of weight gain or weight loss. Tentatively, the boy came inside and came face to face with me in all my glory. My back stooped and bulged. I was bald in all the places you'd want hair and bushy in the places you didn't. My hand crabbed into half fists, and I had to wear special gloves to keep them open. My eyes had a milky film and produced an impressive amount of gunk. On the plus side, I didn't wear a diaper. At 107, this was not nothing. I put down the sweater and tapped the bedside tray where I had been taking my meals. He was in such a hurry to get away from my decrepitude that after he dropped the box, he spun on his heel and tripped on the bed frame, grabbing the nearest thing he could find to steady himself, which happened to be you, or rather the portrait of you that Babki had painted almost 85 years ago, the one that had watched over me for 8 decades, above the pallet in my hideaway in the Tatra Mountains, propped against my metal bunk bed in the Austrian displaced persons camp, in the third-class berth of the USS Saratoga buffeting me across the Atlantic, in the Orchard Street rooming house where Adek and I first lived, in the first house I bought, in the last house I sold, and finally to my room here in the antechamber of death, on the wall next to my bed. With my eyes crapped out, I could no longer make out the details, but what my eyes couldn't see didn't matter anymore. I could see your face as clearly as that summer day Babki had painted you. The boy let go of the frame, but it was too late. The wire had come loose and the painting shuddered and then began to fall. "Olka!" I cried out. "It's okay," the boy said. "I caught it." And he did. He was gripping the frame on both sides, hugging it almost as if it were a human. "The wire came loose. I'm really sorry. I can fix it if you want me to." "Please," I whispered. "I can't see so good." He rewired the picture with practiced expertise. I didn't know it yet, but he and his mother had moved 14 times over a period of 10 years, and he had become expert at hanging pictures and spackling plaster. He took pains to make sure it was straight. When he was satisfied with his work, he stepped back and said, "Good as new, Olka." Olka. Hearing your name spoken aloud by a voice full of life, it had been years. It shocked me. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice sputtering like an unused engine. "Olka," he said the name again. "Isn't that what she's called?" "How do you know that?" "You just said it when she fell." So I had. "I'd never heard that name before," he added. "It's Polish." "Is that where you're from?" "Not for a long, long time." I paused. "Olka, it felt so good to hear your name again. It had been so long." "It's short for Alexandra," I told the boy, "or Alexandra here." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "My mom's name is Alexandra, and mine too, kind of. Not Alexandra, but Alexander, or Alex, really. My mom named me that because she didn't think it was fair the boys are always named after their fathers. And anyway, I don't even know my father." The boy looked back at the painting, feeling a strange shiver. "Olka," he repeated the name. It was not so unusual. Alexandra is not such a rare name in the United States, but it was coincidence enough to spark his curiosity. "What was she like?" "Do you really want to know?" And then the boy, who did not want to be here, who thought that old people were gross, that Shady Glen was punishment, that opportunities were a trick, a boy who trusted no one, liked no one, counted no one among his friends, said, "Yeah, why not?" And now, Joseph begins to tell the story of how he met Olka. This is the second story. Or the first story. I don't know. The first time I saw her, I thought she was ugly. On the outside, she was pretty enough. Blonde hair, watery blue eyes, upturned nose. But if a smile can make an ordinary person beautiful, a scowl can make a beautiful person ugly. And Olka, oof, was she scowling. She did not want to be there. There, in her case, was the tailoring department of the clothing store my family owned, where Olka had recently started work as a seamstress, and where I was standing on a pedestal, clapping. Also, I should mention, I was almost naked. The reason I was almost naked on a pedestal clapping was that I was getting a suit tailored. Pani Susanna, the store's long-term seamstress, had seen me in every kind of ensemble, including my birthday suit. So it was nothing for me to be standing there in a state of undress. The only problem was that Pani Susanna had retired. I ought to have remembered this. I had attended her farewell party. I had toasted her with champagne and given her the small gold watch my mother had chosen as her gift. But like many 20-year-old men, I had other things on my mind. School, friends, girls, especially girls. I had a date that weekend with a girl, a pretty girl who did not scowl. And I had a new suit, and I wanted to get it altered for the date, which was why I was standing on the pedestal in the tailoring room of my family's clothing store in nothing but my underpants and socks, waiting to get measured. Olka had not been sleeping. She'd been hiding in the curtain-changing area, so engrossed in a book that she had not noticed me entering the tailoring room and taking off my clothes until I clapped. After which she opened the curtains, saw me, and shrieked, "Ah, you're naked!" "I'm not naked. I'm wearing undershorts and socks. I'm here to get my suit altered." I pointed to the garment bag. It was a very nice suit, French, light gray, worsted wool with double cuffs. Mother had bought it for me in Paris. "I can hardly pin you when you're naked. Put the suit on." While I donned the suit, Olka returned to the changing area, yanking the curtain shut with such force that her book fell to the floor. She snatched it up quickly, but not before I saw that it was Quo Vadis. I could not imagine Pani Susanna reading a novel like Quo Vadis. To be honest, I doubted the old woman knew how to read. I doubted the young woman did either. As if she could read my thoughts, she scowled as she re-emerged, holding a pincushion and some chalk. She knelt before me and began yanking at my trouser cuff. Looking on her literally and figuratively, I asked if she was enjoying the book. There was a mocking tone in my voice. She must have heard it, because she promptly stabbed me in the ankle with a straight pin. "Ouch!" I cried. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, not sounding very sorry at all. As she began to pin my hem, I continued my inquisition. "Who is your favorite character?" An easy question, but one that would require some knowledge of the book beyond the general summary. Her skin colored with what I assumed was embarrassment at being caught out. Served her right, I thought, pantomiming like that. "Mine is Petronius," I continued, inviting her to fall into my trap. Petronius was not a very good man. She muttered something under her breath. "I'm sorry, did you say something?" She looked up at me, her eyes flashing. "I said you would like Petronius best. He is a spoiled, two-faced brat who speaks out of both sides of his mouth." I was shocked, not just because she had aptly described Petronius, but because she had so badly insulted me. "You don't even know me," I fumed. "No, it is you who do not know me," she replied. "How should I?" She let out a very deep sigh. "We were at school together." At this, I started to laugh. It was just so inconceivable, and oof, the look on her face. Murderous. "I'm sorry," I continued. Now, I was the one who didn't sound remotely sorry. "But you must be confused. I went to—" I named my school, an elite private academy. It's different now, but you must understand that in Poland at that time, only wealthy families bothered to educate girls. The girls who had attended my school were the daughters of doctors, lawyers, or merchants. Olka stabbed me again with a pin. This time she did not even pretend that it was an accident. I am not confused, she said. I was 2 years behind you. I don't think so. I was, and I was the top student. Aha! I caught her in a blatant lie. I happened to know that Alex Kravitz was the top student that year. Alex was a pompous twit who happened to be the son of my mother's friend, and so occasionally we were forced to dine together. At one such dinner, the conversation had focused on brilliant Alex, who had made top student. He had smirked at me because I had graduated 2 years earlier with no such honors. But so what if I was a mediocre student? I would inherit the family business no matter what marks I earned. You, top student? I said. No, that's impossible. Impossible. Was that ever the wrong word to use with her? She had been hearing it for much of her life, starting after her mother died, and she went to live with her mother's brother, who said it was impossible for her to continue her schooling, even though she had been such an excellent student in primary school that the teachers pulled her aside at the end of each year to extol her intellect and curiosity. But intellect and curiosity did not pay for bread or coal, her uncle said, and just because his sister was dead shouldn't mean he had to feed another mouth. Olka had to contribute to the family's coffers. So at the age of 12, she was sent to work with her uncle's wife, who cleaned the homes of Krakow's wealthiest families. It was at the home of one of those families that a 14-year-old Olga was caught reading a book while dusting. The matron of the house accused Olka of stealing. Olka explained she was not stealing, merely borrowing the books to pass the time as she cleaned. The matron had responded with a haughty, "Impossible!" There was no way a cleaning girl could read such a complex novel. Olka went on to detail the plot and themes with such accuracy and insight that the matron, who happened to be on the board of a well-regarded private school, arranged for Olka to be tested. And when the results came in, a perfect score unheard of for well-educated girls, much less housemaids, she used her position to have Olka admitted to the school and receive a 4-year scholarship. Olka outsmarted impossible until she graduated from high school. She wanted to go to university, but discovered there would be no scholarship to pay for it. There would be no loan from the matron. Her uncle now insisted she get a job and pull her weight or leave the house. Having nowhere to go, she surrendered to impossible and applied for the job at our family store, where she was hired because Olka sold like she did everything in life, with full intensity and effort. She could let out a skirt in half the time it once took Pani Susanna, which afforded her a fair amount of spare time between tasks to read, which was what she'd been doing when I interrupted her and insulted her and threw another impossible at her. She called me a name then, a terrible, if not unfamiliar one. It was a name I had been called before, as had my father and his father. Any time a person had a gripe with the way my father conducted business, the furrier whose counterfeit mink coats my father refused to carry, a customer who tried to return a clearly worn dress from 2 seasons earlier, the name would get hurled out. Once she said it, I was almost happy. She was a liar and a bigot. I had been right all along. Olka withered like a popped balloon, seeming to understand the error of blurting out such a word to a customer, even if she still did not realize that this customer was the future owner of the store that employed her. Had she known, perhaps her manner would have been more civil. But if her manner had been more civil, I might not be alive to tell you this story. The boy was silent when I finished talking, the kind of silence that if you didn't know better, you might mistake for the lack of interest or comprehension. Neither of those was the case. He was interested, and he understood more in that short snippet than he ought to have. He knew what it was like to lose a mother, even though his hadn't died. He knew what it was like to live with a relative who didn't want him. And he knew what it was like to be provoked, how terrible that could feel, how it was like the outside world agreeing with every bad thing you knew to be true about yourself. And most of all, he understood that impossible was to Olka what opportunity was to him. No wonder she'd called her Joseph a mean name, he thought. What took you so long? Julio complained when the boy returned to the kitchen. Mr. Lippincott called down 3 times asking where his meal was. It's not my fault, the boy said. That one guy in room 206 kept me in there talking for ages. Mr. Kravitz? Julio asked. Twice a week for the past 5 years, I'd visited Julio in the PT room, where he had done his best to keep my atrophying muscles from disintegrating. But we'd never exchanged a word. He'd seen my file, which claimed that I had stroke-induced mutism. I think you're confused. Mr. Kravitz is nonverbal. Confused? The boy thought about you. Then, yes, a very few minutes into the story, and you, Olka, had already burrowed into him. And how maddening it was to have someone say you were confused when you were not confused. He knew my name. He had double-checked it and my room number on the chart on his way out, so that if he wasn't on food duty tomorrow, he'd remember where to find me, because he was already wondering what had happened to you. Mr. Kravitz. He'd memorized it. Room 206. I am not confused. It was Mr. Kravitz in 206. He's like 107 years old, and he sews. Now Julio's face changed. The boy was describing me as aptly as you had when you compared me to Petronius. But Julio knew, as did everyone at Shady Glen, that I did not speak. Mr. Kravitz doesn't talk, he said, his voice stony. So I don't think he talked to you. Are you calling me a liar? The boy's voice was stonier than Julio's. If you're telling me that Mr. Kravitz spoke to you, then yeah, I am. And there it was again, that anger, not like it had been in the day the social worker told him his mother was in a hospital, or the day of the incident, but it was there, always seething in him, keeping him warm against the world's coldness. I am not a liar, he growled. Easy now, Layla said, overhearing the hubbub. No one said you were. Yes, he did, the boy said at the same time Julio said. Yes, I did. A name popped into the boy's head, a mean word he'd heard people use to describe people like Julio. It was at the tip of his tongue. But then he thought of you, the trouble you'd probably gotten into with that word you'd said, and he decided to keep quiet. To stop the fighting, Etta went to see Mr. Kravitz in room 206 and found out, sure enough, that he does talk. And at that moment, people begin to see Alex in a new light. Julio apologizes, and everybody is marveling, why did Mr. Kravitz pick this young boy? Do you see already that Olga's story is starting to change Alex? He's not saying the words he thinks before he says anything. He takes control of his anger. And so his interactions with Joseph and the stories begin to help Alex. They see that he's good at talking with people, so the staff encourages him to go talk to all the residents and see if he can help them. But his favorite person to go to is Mr. Kravitz, and he hears more of the story. Turns out, Joseph was very upset that Olka had called him that name so long ago, and he was determined to fire her. But something told him he needed to check out her story. So he went to his friend Adik and asked who was the top student. And he finds out that Adik was lying. It really was Olka. And so instead of firing her, he apologizes to her. She thought she was going to have to leave and find a new job. But instead, Joseph says, please, would you teach me how to sew? And as the story goes on, we find out that his ability to sew is what saves his life and brings him to where he is now to help Alex. Two stories that come together. This is a wonderful story. All kinds of great things going on. I can't say them all in this little bit, but I encourage you to pick up this book. It's very heartwarming,
Very good story. Not Nothing by Gail Foreman. This has been Chapter Book Storytime. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.